Gallup, New Mexico, 1986. In the early morning of April 6th, there was a knock on the door of the Cayedito residence. Penny Cayedito, the homeowner, didn't hear the knock as she was sleeping off a late night at the bar with friends. However, two of her three young daughters heard the knock, 5-year-old Wendy Montoya and 9-year-old Anthonette Cayedito. Being the oldest, Anthonette went to go answer the door as her little sister went back to sleep. When Penny woke up later that morning and went to go wake her daughters, she noticed Anthonette wasn't in the room. Thinking she'd gone outside already, Penny went outside to ask the neighbors if they'd seen Anthonette. The neighbors helped search the surrounding areas, but there was no sign of the young girl. One neighbor would mention seeing a brown truck or van with New Mexico license plates outside the Cayedito home that morning, as well as a man walk up and knock on the door, but at the time she didn't think anything of it. Penny then phoned the police, but they wouldn't make an official missing persons report until hours later. A massive search went out for Anthonette, but nothing turned up. Canine units were brought in, but they weren't able to pick up Anthonette's scent. It wouldn't be until sometime later that her little sister Wendy would come forward and admit that she'd been awake and listening when Anthonette went to answer the door that night. When Anthonette asked who was there, the visitor identified himself as their Uncle Joe, Penny's sister's husband. Anthonette opened the door and was immediately grabbed by two men, and despite her attempts to fight back, she was shoved into a brown van. The police interrogated the real Uncle Joe, but he had a solid alibi for the night of Anthonette's disappearance and was cleared of all involvement. When asked why she didn't come forward earlier, Wendy says at the time she was worried about getting in trouble, but she grew up holding on to that guilt. She says maybe, if she'd spoken up sooner, they would have found her sister. While there haven't been any solid leads since 1986, there have been reported sightings and clues involving Anthonette's whereabouts. 1 year after her disappearance, Gallup Police Department received this phone call.
Gallup Police Department. Hello? I'm Anthonette Cayedito. I'm Anthonette Cayedito in Albuquerque. Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque? Hello? Anthonette, where are you? Anthonette? Hello?
The call wasn't long enough for the police to trace, and Penny Cayedito would later say that she was certain the young girl's voice was her daughter's.
By the way she says her last name and the way she screamed sent chills all over my body. Because a mother knows, and I know that was her.
Roughly 4 years later, there was a reported sighting in a diner in Carson City, Nevada. A waitress reported a teenage girl who looked similar to the missing girl. She recalled the girl sat with an unkempt-looking man and woman. The girl kept knocking her utensils to the floor and would squeeze the waitress's hand every time she would give the girl a new one. When the group left, the waitress cleared the table, and underneath the girl's plate was a napkin that read, "Help me, call the police." Unfortunately, nothing would come from this reported sighting. Anthonette Cayedito is still missing today, almost 34 years later. Her mother, Penny, has since passed, and Wendy has grown up and sadly admits to not remembering much of her sister anymore, only what she knows from the stories people have told her. What really happened to Anthonette has never been revealed, but there are a couple of speculations. In 2016, the police stated their belief that Penny may have had more information than she was willing to disclose, as she failed a lie detector test she took about her daughter's disappearance during the investigation. People questioned that, if Wendy's versions of the events were true, why didn't Penny hear the door, or her young daughter screaming and fighting back against her abductors? There's also the fact that the abductors knew the family well enough to pose as Uncle Joe at the door to get Anthonette to open it, but Wendy admitted she didn't recognize either of the two men that took her sister. There have been a few discrepancies in this story, such as which sister witnessed these events. Different variations of the story will mention either Wendy or Sadie, the middle sister, as the one to come forward and describe the events from April 6th. There's also reasonable doubt to the sister's story as a whole, seeing as it took 5 years for one of them to come forward with the information. But taking into account their age and the effects of trauma, the consensus is that these events did happen, though some still doubt its accuracy. The phone call that was received a year after her disappearance is up for debate as well. The little girl in the call says she's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, yet it was the Gallup Police Department that received the call, meaning if it had been Anthonette and she managed to get to a phone, she didn't dial 911, but the actual longer number to the Gallup police. The biggest theory behind Anthonette's disappearance is that she was sold into human sex trafficking. It was known that the Cayedito family had money troubles, and it was reported that Penny made some expensive purchases after her daughter's disappearance, such as a new sports car. The theory would also explain why Penny didn't open the door, and it was apparently known that Penny would be gone all night drinking, allowing such an event to take place. The theory takes note of how the abductor knew to pose as Uncle Joe, as if he knew he was talking to a child. It's speculated that the eventual confession from the sisters about that night's events, as well as the phone call a year later, were faked in order to throw police off the trail. But it's just that, speculation. Regardless of what truly happened to Anthonette, a 9-year-old girl was stolen from her own home, and no one knows what happened to her. While some people who go missing are found years, even decades later, after 34 years it's likely that young Anthonette has since died. The other possibility is frankly much darker to think about. Anthonette Cayedito is now a fading memory, and unfortunately she isn't the only one.